word called benign neglect, which means you move into everybody for benign neglect for another 60 years, and now you just forget about them, period. How do they get into wealth? If slavery, the whole point of slavery was to maldistribute everything into the hands of the white society. So you got to go work to get it. Who are you working for? And why would they take the wealth and power they got and give it to you? And so clearly, blacks are not moving any place, Dr. Watkins. They're still exactly where they were in 1860 on the eve of the Civil War. And that's when the Biden administration ain't doing a damn thing to help him. And he's committed himself not doing anything because he needs the redneck support in the South. He needs the women's support. He needs the Asian support. He needs the Arab support. And right now he's committed one of the grossest, most offensive insult in the history of mankind in this country, bringing in 150,000 Afghanistans. Think about that. Here are people now who we fought for 20 years, lost about 50-some thousand damn soldiers been killed and murdered. And we put billions and billions of dollars, somewhere close to $100 billion in there trying to fight for them. And then they bring them over here, guess what? To give them first-class citizenship. And here's a nail in that coffin. He didn't turn around last week and say, well, not only are we going to bring in all these Afghanistan to give them first-class citizenship, but and put them over black folk, which is in violation of the 13th Amendment and the 14th Amendment. It's an insult. It's unconstitutional to do it. But we're going to do it because black folk ain't got enough damn sense to get out there and say, no, don't bring all those damn people into this country and put them over us. Do something for all these black people that been here for all these 400-some years working. And so what he does, well, what I will do for them then, because they're going to need some help. As soon I'm bringing over 250 to 200,000. I'm going to put them on welfare. Now, why would you let this country, as a black person, back in 1995, set up special programs to get blacks off of welfare, Dr. Watkins, kicking them off of welfare. Saying you black folk, all y'all want is a free ride and be on welfare. We're gonna set up a new welfare system where you have to be, where we kicking as many blacks off as we can off of welfare, kicking them off of food stamps, kicking them off aid for dependent children. You kick them off all these major programs, and here you are bringing 150,000 people in this country from another country who haven't contributed a penny. You're gonna put them on welfare. That's what you are, and all the stuff that you kick black folk off. That is an absolutely insult. And what I want you to do for me between now and the next election, you find some blacks that want to go into printing and know how to make stamps and make a stamp saying, I is stupid. So you can dip it on the plotter. So every time a black goes to the poll and he says he's gonna go vote for somebody, and if it's different, you stamp it on his back. I is stupid. No, you're an asshole. That's what you are.
Well, Dr. Anderson, it is interesting you bring that up because there could be another election tomorrow, and they tend to know the triggers, and they tend to know specifically how to pressure black people to pressure each other, right? So that they don't actually have to do it. What I noticed was during the election, even when you said, what are we voting for? What are we doing here? This doesn't make any sense. You had a lot of black folks that had a real vested interest, and maybe you can give us a historical context on that as we dig into the book. But I would like to understand the root of that. I wonder if there's something that goes back to our slave training, where you will have black folks that'll beat other black people worse than white folks will. That when so for example, right now there was a rapper, Nicki Minaj. That you might have heard about her, but she was basically kind of questioning some things about this shot they want everybody to take. I'm not going to say the B word because if I say it and they hear it on YouTube, they ban your channel for even saying the word.
One question a second. Now, is Nas, is he a she?
Nas, no. Are you talking about I'm sorry. Nicki Minaj is a she. It's a rapper, and one of the things that was interesting was that she never said that she was against getting that shot. She just said, I'm going to do my research. I'm not sure. Let me think about it. And what happened what was real interesting was there's a black lady on MSNBC named Joy Reid who became the first person to jump right on top of her and attack her. You spread misinformation, blah, 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 blah. And I found it just real interesting that whenever a black person rises up and speaks up, the first person to really put the smack on them is usually another black person. Is there a historical context to that? Or how does that link to the plantation. Like I wonder if there's something to the plantation, like about that, like get her, go get her, Joy, that kind of thing.
Yeah, well, there is, and I'll be glad to speak to that. But the primary thing is, as I begin to speak on this point, remember what I told you before. There's a marked difference, a major difference, a tremendously large difference between an African American and a native Black American, because those two people have undergone specifically distinct upbringings and characteristics and culturalization, and that are different. See, there's very little difference now, except for the fact of skin color and ancient historical bloodlines between a native Black American and an African American. Anybody who comes in this country, ever since way back for the last 200 or 300 years, they would easily be called an African American because they have voluntarily come into this country. They are not native Blacks, they are African Americans. They come from a place where they had a culture, they had a history, they had a language, they had relatives, they had friends, they had a system, they had an education system, they were institutionalized. They had nothing in the world to do with America, period. They were never enslaved. They were never deprived of their culture and their religion, and their history, their family, and their lives, and an education. There are differences. And the worst thing you can do to hurt Blacks in this country is to keep mixing those two together, because that plays right in the hand of white racists in all my years in politics in this country and around the world on trade missions, representing presidents and governors and different states in the United States, and interacting with countries in Latin America, in the Caribbean, in France, and Germany, and England, where I was talking to the heads of nations. And they clearly understood what I was saying. And right now, it's a wonder I come to this country and I tell Blacks there's a distinction between an African American and a Native American. They don't even understand what I'm talking about. Because see, when every African that was kidnapped and put on a boat and branded on the forehead as a slave, and as he understood what was happening to him, he was subjected to some horrific, negative situations, crossing the ocean and coming to America. Once he got to America, he was seasoned. That means he was beaten for about 5 or 6 months and trained to think strictly as a slave. And then that was before he could even be sold. He had to be stripped of his clothes and go out there naked. And most time, even when he went naked in the markets, slave markets, white people would see him naked, and white women could come up and feel his testicles and say, well, they liked him in the house. Everybody, they stripped him of his dignity and everything. And so that's a major difference. So when you hear somebody questioning Black folk about what they should be doing in terms of voting, you should wonder, now, is that a Native American or is that a Black American? And see, Native Americans, they're just like these other immigrants coming to the country. The first thing they want to do, just in stone, raw appreciation for having an opportunity to come in this country and be equal to or above Black folk. And so any immigrant coming to this country would immediately grab hold to a flag and start waving it. They'll walk through the neighborhood and try to wave the flag and talk to you about being very strong Americans. They've been taught that before they get here, that to be a good American and you can always convert yourself and be a terrorist once you get here, but always demonstrate, put flags all over your doors and in your yard, and as if you're an immigrant, because that way you came here based on the first thing that was passed by the United States Congress after the Constitution was ratified. And that was in 1790. That was called the first naturalization and immunization law, which says this is a white country. And the people are going to be invited here to come here to enjoy the fruits of this country and the fruits of the benefits of coming off of slavery, which means free labor and free land, will have to be immigrants, period. No, and Blacks come in here, you're going to bring in somewhere between 12 and 15 million Blacks into the North American country. Those people have been seasoned in the islands and down in the Caribbean to be a slave, be useless, equal to a field animal, 3/5 of a human being, Dr. Lomax.
Well, let me jump in.
Sorry, I called you Dr. Lomax. That's my.
Oh, that's okay. It's all right. You know what? I was going to say that. Well, what was interesting though was just in that particular situation I was asking you about, with actually a lot of people on this platform agreed with the rapper, Nicki Minaj, who was saying, you know, we have a right to make our own decision. You know, we shouldn't just do whatever the Democrats tell us to do. You know, we should not let people control us, right? So what happened was Joy Reid, who works for MSNBC, which is heavily Democratic, immediately started kind of pounding away on her, right? Like almost like a slave beating another slave. Like you, master's mad at you, I'm gonna beat you. And the same thing happened when Cornel West challenged Barack Obama.
Before you leave that point, let me interrupt you a second. Now, is Joy Reid, is she an African American or is she a Native American?
She's African American.
Okay,
Nicki Minaj is from the Caribbean, but it was really more so. Nicki made a point about why you as a black woman attacking me on behalf of your white masters. That was basically the point she was kind of making, and I saw that point. I saw that point in the sense of, you know, I saw the same thing happen when she's of Nigerian descent though, but I think she's African American. They said Nigeria, but I got to look at the background. But here was the thing that made me think about Dr. Anderson. I thought about when Cornel West started challenging Barack Obama. White people didn't come get him. It wasn't mainly white people getting him. They sent Michael Eric Dyson. They sent Melissa Harris Perry. They sent black people to go after the black man. And it seems to me that that's a tradition, that if we want to deal with this Negro, we're not going to deal with him ourselves. We're going to deal with him. We're going to send our Negro minions to go deal with him. And I wonder if that's something that's a tradition on the plantation of sending a black person to go squash and deal with another. Because right now the big problem is that the government's telling everybody to go get this shot. 2/3 of the people that are on this platform said they don't want to get it. And so black people, so what they're doing is they're paying a lot of celebrities to tell black people to go do it. They're paying a lot of preachers to tell black folks to do it. They're telling every politician to tell black folks to do it. And so if anybody in that space does not agree, they get ostracized and attacked. And it seems to me that it reminds me of what happened during the election. That's what I want to ask you about in terms of just that historical context of black folks pressuring other black people like that.
Okay, let me go to that now and try to answer that for you. Now, I've already told you the first thing you should always do if you're dealing with black folk, decide who is an African American and who is a descendant of a slave in this country. Those who are descendants of slaves in this country, that means that they were born anew on those slave ships, or when they first got into the United States, they were totally stripped. Now remember that the Native Americans were totally stripped of everything African. Okay, they had no relatives over here. They didn't get Christmas cards, Christmas greetings. They didn't have people, loved ones, coming to see them, visit them. They have never had any communications. They didn't have a history to relate back to. They didn't have an educational situation. See, the people coming in now from those different countries, all they've been done is colonized. They were colonized, which means you had a white, so there's a ruling class over them, but nobody stripped them and nobody stripped those blacks down in the Caribbean. Nobody stripped them over in Africa. They could wander, had their own little villages and go places. They were colonized. There's a major substantive difference for being colonized and being enslaved. Enslaved means you get your whipping every night on time. And you got workloads to do every day, or you get beaten or shot or killed. So that's the difference. So before you make those, try to reach and understand these things, first decide whether that person that you're hearing are those people that are mixing it up. Which ones are Native Black Americans, which are the direct descendants of slaves, and those which are African Americans, those who come in, people of African descent that came in from the Caribbean or Africa someplace. That is key. That is extremely key. And see, whites know this, because whites know that anything coming in from the Caribbean or from Africa, that the United States owe them nothing, not zero, zilch. They don't owe them anything, because they even in the back rooms and in the front rooms and the microphone in front of a TV set, they'll tell you, we don't owe Africans anything. We don't owe Caribbeans anything. We have never enslaved them. If they got a problem down in the Caribbean, let them go to England and complain. Let them go to France and complain. Let them go to Spain and complain. And go back to some of those colonies, back to the 1886 with the Berlin Conference, where all those European nations came into Africa and colonized them. Let them bitch and complain to them. But they can't complain to the United States, because the United States, only thing the United States picked up was Liberia. and most of the slaves went in there we were some of them we were releasing from here to go over there. So the United States said we're not in that. Anything. Now I'm gonna get to your answer to your question. Now the question that you're asking was that slavery based? Yes, it was. and it wasn't just a feeling or an attitude or a public request. It was a law. It's called the law of in the slave code. In the slave code, Dr. Watkins, of 1705. Can you remember that one now for me? 1705 slave code says that here is how Black folk are to carry themselves. And so first thing they did, they put out in the slave codes, they put out two things, like a sheet of paper. Front side says, here is how whites are to treat slaves, and here's how whites are to treat themselves and then deal with other whites. And that's called the slave codes, which means that in the slave code side, it says under no circumstances can you let Black folk do anything that would elevate them above the level of a slave. And they got all kind of laws. And if he does do it, we're going to wind up lynching him. And let me in a second give you high note. This might be some of interest to you. Maybe I'll save it for a little later. But anyway, they had a slave code, and they said they call it Meritorious manumission. You remember that one, don't you? Okay, yep. Meritorious manumission it's in your black labor white wealth book. And that what they said, this law says that the only time a Black must operate within the context of the slave codes. Slave codes mean codes of etiquette that are being imposed on whites and on Blacks, which means if a white person violated, they would call you a nigger lover. And they would just assume sometimes shoot you or kill you for being a nigger lover, okay? And on the Black side, you could be prosecuted and lynched and castrated or mistreated or abused, but just simply violating that code of etiquette. And that's what a code is. And unfortunately, we as Black folk have never had a substantial code of etiquette. And so that's why we don't have any rules to go by. We can get away with some of the questions you're asking. And I had something here on my desk a few minutes ago. I was going to read to you anyway, show you, make that point to you. But
and by the way, Meritorious manumission, everybody, is on page 166 of Black Labor, White Wealth. And the story that made me laugh, Dr. Anderson, was you told the story about Haywood Shepherd in Harper's Ferry, that they put a statue of him. It says the importance that whites placed on Black informants is emphatically demonstrated by a rare monument that the town of Harper's Ferry erected to honor Haywood Shepherd, a Black man who was killed by the totally committed abolitionist John Brown and his raiding party shortly before the Civil War. Haywood Shepherd was shot dead by John Brown's party when he recognized John Brown and attempted to warn the town that they were there to free the slaves. In grateful recognition of placing the economic interests of the slaveholders above the freedom of his own people, the town erected the only monument honoring a Black man that could appropriately be described as a symbol. Since the Black Civil Rights Movement in the late 1960s, the statue has been stored beside the city's the city's major museum, and covered with a wooden box. So it looks like so he got a statue built because he snitched on the Black people trying to revolt, basically.
Okay, now that's called Meritorious manumission. Meritorious manumission policy was set up firstly in South Carolina, somewhere around 1735 in that general time frame. And what they said in there is that they said we must build a code of etiquette and acceptability and that would be internal to Black folk. So rather than we have to whip them, beat them all the time, let's put it on automatic to where they know in advance what they cannot do and what they can, because otherwise each one of us have to hire a whole bunch of what we call nigger whippers. Okay, that's the point you were asking about, because so on every plantation they would take the biggest and burliest Black they can get their hands on and make him the whipper, okay? And if they didn't have one on some occasions, they would just write a note and put it in his hand and send him down the road over to the next plantation. And since this black person could not read and write, he would take the note down and say, give this to Mr. Charlie. He walked up to the white man and says, my master say, give this to you. And only Charlie says, I need you to whip my ass good and give me at least 300 whip the licks with a whip with the metal on the end of it. That was called a whipper. And they would give it to the biggest and strongest black, if that was his job, if he had that position on a plantation. And nowadays we call him an ass whipper. That's what he did. And they did the same thing when they wanted to kill a black person or lynch a black person. And see, most time the whites didn't do the lynching because white folks didn't want to associate the lynchings too much with themselves. They would usually stop every black from working, bring him out of the fields, and bring him out around the trees someplace on the plantation, and have them all sit out there and watch this. And what was called let us teach him a lesson. And they would put this black on the end of a rope, and they would put the rope in the hand of one of the biggest and strongest blacks they can get on the ranch, or on the plantation, and let him pull the rope up and lynch the black person. That way, you know what happened? See, then the black couldn't criticize the whites for the lynching. They would criticize the black, the things you're talking about. So they put blacks in a position where they were socially conditioned and socially engineered into beating the hell out of their own people. That's where they would get, and they would get rewarded and compensated. So the three key elements in the Meritorious manumission was: one, you could get free. Meritorious manumission means earned freedom, earned liberties, earned privileges. And that's what white called meritorious manumission for a black person. And a black person could get a little bit of that if he would do something that would be very instrumental in achieving the goal that white folks wanted, was to increase their wealth holding and being rich and making a lot of money, because they were tired of working, so they didn't want to work. So the biggest sign and status for a white person was to have no work, to be free, to do nothing but just loaf all day long, go downtown and live what they call a good life. The quality of, so they were looked up to if they had to have to lift their hands for anything. So, and if a black person could help him make money, he can get work, he can get his freedom. If he invents something, or if he learn how to we can go out there with a whip and whip the rest of the blacks' ass and make them work a little harder. They can make them work harder. So now instead of picking 150 pounds of cotton a day, he would pick 200 or 250, and he can get them off. And that's what Simon Legree was up to in the book, Uncle Tom's Cabin. He wanted Uncle Tom to whip the slaves and make them work faster, and also to pick more cotton. And then that would have been a key step in his element. And Uncle Tom naturally refused to do it, and he turned it down each time. Simon Legree told him to do it, and then he silent, and he says, and Simon Legree says, well, I'm your master. I want you to whip these slaves, including the women, and make them pick more cotton. And secondly, I want you to tell me when a slave decides to run away, where does he run off to? How does he get away? Where is he hiding? And the third thing is you tell me what I can do to recapture him and bring him back. And Uncle Tom said, I'm not gonna do that. So he tells Gumbo and Sambo, I want you to whip his ass every night and give him no less than 150 stripes with that whip that would cut the skin off his back. And so Uncle Tom said, you can beat me because you're the master, but you're not my God. And so because Uncle Tom was a very religious man. He was a weak man. He was very religious and he's weak. But he was not a bad man. That's why most people never understood that. That's why my books try to explain the difference between a Sambo and an Uncle Tom. Uncle Tom was just a weak black man. Sometimes, in most cases, he was overly religious, and all he wanted to do was just survive long enough to go to heaven and be with God. And so he got beaten to death by Sambo. Sambo beat him all every night until he died. And so that was the second point in it. The third thing he had to do is that if you want to get free, besides beating a black person, you could also, and make money for him. The last thing was that you had to squeal on any time a black person was plotting to run away from the white man and escape across the river. So you had to tell Simon Legree or the white man, Uncle Charlie, where the whites would be hiding. So that's called meritorious manumission. Helping a white person, one, make money and wealth, increase his sales. Two, you had to be able to protect and save over a black person's life. If you protect a member of his family, you can get meritorious manumission. Or 3, if you squeal on and tell on anytime you heard a black was plotting or contemplating causing a riot or a slave revolt. That's why in all these big cities, they always put the first people they put on the police force. They started putting blacks on the police force in the United States. The first 2 places that got police officers were places like Atlanta, Georgia. They picked to put a black on the police force. But they put it so that he couldn't carry a gun and he could not arrest white people. And he could not go in white communities and do anything. He only could do it in black neighborhoods. He can go in any black neighborhoods and do what he wanted to do. And they try to pick what's called the baddest black they can have in every city and put him on the police force. That started about 1948. They did the same thing in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. They picked the biggest, burliest looking black folk whose IQ couldn't be over 7 and put him on the police force. But he couldn't do anything though. He could not arrest white people. He could not go into the white community and do anything. But he represented a way of punishing black folk, and by getting so he can get meritorious manumission. And so he got a job in 1948 too in Winston-Salem. One got it in Atlanta, Georgia, as the first 2 black police officers. And nowadays they do the same thing, what you're talking about in the movie industry and entertainment industry. You find a black person who wants a good job on a TV network, and they're telling them straight up, we'll get you a good job if you go on the air and you run, and every time you get a chance, here is a list. Here's a list of all the would-be black sambos. I give you a list of all of them. You keep that in your top drawer in the TV station. And anytime you need somebody to sell out blacks, do blacks in, lie on them, cheat on them, squeal on them, tell on them, you tell where the liquor stores are, where the drug corners are. They're selling drugs, or anybody that's doing some bad stuff. You sell them out. Tell them to take it to tell the police department about it. Sell them out, and you get meritorious manumission. Those are the 2 biggest ways that they use that to divide black folks, and they use a black person always to punish. The second point,